Welcome to The Christian Atheist, Episode 18, On Ethics, Part 5. In the 13th episode of The Christian Atheist, I said, we are accountable to respond in faith to the light given to us, and none of us are without light. There are two paradigmatic responses to God's light, that of Cain and that of Abel. As I've listened through the years to various Christian versus atheist debates, almost invariably the Christian will appeal to grounding in objective ethics in God. This argument takes the valid deductive form known as modus tollens. Premise 1. If God does not exist, then objective ethics does not exist. Premise 2. Objective ethics does exist. Conclusion. Therefore, God exists. Despite its deductive validity, although I make no claim concerning soundness here, this argument has almost no value in persuading atheists to believe in God. As a group, it has been my experience that atheists are among the most morally concerned human beings on the planet. And truly, most of their objections to God, faith, and structured religions are moral objections. The best evidence against God being the author of morality, many atheists will assert, is the existence of Christians and Christianity. As I have asserted before, there is a godlike arrogation of moral certainty in thoughts like these, but they're most definitely not irrational. We human beings judge others as though we are God, as though we have a comprehensive knowledge and understanding of both the subjective and objective conditions of human action. It is a fault to which both Christians and non-Christians are susceptible. It was precisely this sort of judgment that Jesus warned against in the Sermon on the Mount. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. Matthew 7:1. The reason that this valid deductive argument will never convince an atheist is that they know themselves as ethical. All human beings do. They believe God does not exist, yet they find ethics within themselves. Ethical judgment is not accidental, but essential to our humanity, as we have argued in previous editions of The Christian Atheist. What need, then, for an external grounding for ethics? We can see here the grounding of human experience as a lived ontology. We are ethical beings. We all know ourselves as such. To deny the existence of ethics is not, therefore, to deny God, but to deny the evidence of our most intimate being. Whether or not God exists, ethics does. Likewise for arguments concerning the existence of the universe, its fine-tuning, its complexity. That these things are the case are simple facts. And how we explain those facts, account for them to the level of metaphysics, doesn't change the facts themselves. In terms of ethics, then, we can adopt two basic metaphysical attitudes to the evidence of ontology. We can accept, number one, that there is an objective right and wrong, and that we ought to conform ourselves to it. This is the traditional view of morality. Second, there is not an objective right and wrong. Ethics is entirely a human construct. These two choices concerning ethics correspond to the notion of human freedom with which we have devoted so much time in previous episodes of The Christian Atheist. The ontological evidence of freedom can be accepted at the metaphysical level, or it can be denied, explained away. As in this case, my own position is clear. I will side with the ontological evidence as true, though this is not something I can prove. I must take these things on faith. I believe, though, as Kant said, that taking them on faith is compatible with as strong a notion of human rationality as can be imagined. Explaining human freedom and ethics away at the metaphysical level is not, however, a new trick. In very many ways, the existence of an objective ethics has been challenged since the time of the Greeks. It was the sophist Protagoras that famously declared, "Man is the measure of all things." And against this sophistical ethical relativism, all the force of the intellects of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were directed in defense of an objective system of values. If anything, though the battle has been with us throughout our history, there has never been a time in which the forces arrayed against an objective value system have been more powerful or pervasive than our present state of affairs. Today's sophists also are enamored of the human intellect and its products. There are two manifestations of this sort of intellectual arrogance: the constructive and the critical. An example of the former, we have Plato's Republic, which is a highly articulated philosophical construction of an ideal society meant to solve all of humanity's ills. At the opposite extreme, we have the critical arrogance of the modern left, both Marxist and non-Marxist, whose sole agenda is the deconstruction of all that exists, with no positive vision of what to replace it with. In both cases, the intellect runs wild in a fancy of moral condemnation, thus adopting the role of supreme judge of the world. Critical of existing structures, and unconstrained by any evidence in opposition to their own moral rectitude. As this is essentially a critical enterprise, all positive structural elements become their target. Everything existing, everything traditional, is an element of oppression that must be destroyed in order to usher in the utopia to come. All destructive change, therefore, to existing structure is good change. This unremitting faith in the moral efficacy of change is the residue of Hegel's dialectic that has permeated Western thought. I often say, we are all, now, in the 21st century, unconscious Hegelians. The thought is, what is must give way to the future, which is always better than the present. This explains why any sort of conservatism must be utterly overthrown. Any notion of traditional society must be destroyed. Why history must be rewritten. All that matters is bringing about the change necessary to usher in what is inevitably coming. This Hegelian faith in the forward march of history hinges upon the opposition to existing structure, the negative judgment in the face of all existing structure. It depends, that is, on the rational capacity to judge. As rational beings possessed of the capacity to critically evaluate, to judge, we find within ourselves an indication of an ideal, which possesses the complete capacity of which we possess only the limited version. Part of this notion of the ideal is the correlate that there are objective judgments, true judgments. And if this is the case, there are real constraints on our own faculty of judgment. We can judge correctly or incorrectly. We can make moral and immoral choices. This too seems to be a part of what we assume at the ontological level, and thus that we can either accept or deny at the metaphysical level. That is, we can accept the existence of an objective system of reality that constrains our judgment, or we can reject it. Relativism of all sorts is the denial that objective constraints exist. So much of contemporary academic thought has sided with this denial of the evidence of the ontological that we now have a new orthodoxy regarding it. We should remember, though, that denying the evidence of ontology is itself a function of human rationality, that unique capacity of human beings to stand outside the natural order of things. From where does that capacity come? We human beings bear the mark and spark of our Creator. As Jesus quoted the psalmist in John 10, "Is it not written in your law? I have said you are gods." If he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and the scripture cannot be broken, then what about the one whom the Father sanctified and sent into the world? How then can you accuse me of blasphemy for stating that I am the Son of God? This is the paradigm of the atheist dilemma. No one is without light, but light must be interpreted and then believed and acted upon. There are two reactions to God's light. We accept our nature as limited beings and assume that we ought to conform ourselves to the right, the truth, the objective reality that we find all around us, within us. Or, secondly, we assume that man is the measure of all things, that we are the authors and final arbiters of truth and ethics, of right and wrong. The first is the response of Abel, and the latter, that of Cain. The battle between these competing visions has raged throughout human history and is not likely to end anytime soon. We should be careful, however, not to identify any one group of people, even Christians and atheists, into one of these categories rather than the other. It is perfectly possible for Christians to claim the moral certitude of judgment against their fellow man, to claim their own position as that of God, instead of humbly acknowledging their own finitude and ignorance in the face of the infinite. Cain, after all, acknowledged God, but trusted in his own actions to justify himself. The real issue, as Hebrews 11 makes clear, is in whom one trusts. I would even argue that an atheist who understands his lack of knowledge, his failure to be what he ought, who acknowledges his frailty and need, is more properly on the way to the truth than one who self-righteously stands believing before God. This, after all, is the very position of Satan himself. Of course, it is almost never the case that any individual human being is all Cain or all Abel in our response to God's light. Rather, we mix the two up in our thoughts and practices. A little Cain here, a little Abel there. I would argue, though, that these two tendencies explain much in our modern world, both in the church and outside of it. When we choose to exclude any real constraints on human intellect or claims to knowledge, even divine knowledge, as is the current trend in academia and critical theory, for instance, by explaining away ethics in the forms of relativism or consequentialism, we are exalting human pride, adopting the position of God, often while denying his existence. This is Hegel's absolute idealism reigning supreme in Western academic thought. For Hegel's position is always that of God, a position which is unavailable to the finite and limited beings that we are. Adopting God's position while denying Him displays the unavoidable tension into which atheism falls. While claiming to know God's thoughts and ways, in spite of remaining fallible and finite creatures, is the arrogance of the church. Isaiah 55:9. As rational beings, our foundational beliefs determine the course of our thoughts and our actions. That is, to any postulate we hold as true, logic will dictate what follows from it. We have repeatedly said in The Christian Atheist that what one truly believes will be most accurately reflected in our actions. We are logical creatures, even if we're not always logical in thought or practice. We can take two fundamental faith positions on our place in the grand scheme of being then. That of Abel. We accept that despite the presence of pain, suffering, and injustice in the world about us, reality is fundamentally good, fundamentally right. Christians must say that reality is God, right? The great I am. And that we ought to ally ourselves with the good, with the right, with God, with the objective and moral order of the universe. Secondly, the position of Cain. We take the position making ourselves the judge of reality, finding it lacking, unjust, immoral, and so we substitute our judgment in place of that which we find. As the judge of being, our human will is supreme. We become God, even as we deny His existence. We should understand that this second option is only possible because of our rational nature. We can be critical of reality, set ourselves up as its judge, because we are rational beings. Because, I would argue, we possess a reflection, a spark of divinity. It is because we are like God that we can take the position of judging God or reality. What then follows logically from these two positions? Abel, in faith, aligns himself to the existing order, does what reality or God requires from him. Cain, by contrast, exercising faith in his own rational nature, morally rejects the given structure, remakes reality in his own image, and ignores the structures given to him. The actions of each, then, play out within the existing framework. Abel finds blessing and prosperity, while Cain, having condemned and rejected reality, finds only more reason for bitterness and condemnation in the consequences that follow from his actions. The logic is inescapable. Resentment escalates, and reason feels ever more justified in its moral condemnation of the existing order. Such injustice must end, whatever the cost. And as Abel is the closest representative and ideal of that corrupt and unfair system, homicidal rage takes its course. Cain hates God, but kills his brother. The story, of course, is infinitely richer than this thumbnail sketch permits, but the logic of the positions of Cain and Abel well represent the ongoing battle of mankind to come to grips with our world. Whether theist or atheist, it is my hope, indeed my prayer, that someone, somewhere, might leave the path of Cain and rediscover that of Abel through this and every edition of the Christian Atheist. I will end this week with a quote from St. Vincent de Paul. The reason why God is so great a lover of humility is because he is the great lover of truth. Now, humility is nothing but truth, while pride is nothing but lying. God show each of us, believers and unbelievers, the way to the truth, and may we follow him until we find rest in you. If this is the first edition of The Christian Atheist you've seen, please subscribe below to be sure not to miss upcoming episodes and to catch up on those you've missed. First, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And let us know what you'd like to hear from us by commenting. Wise Words for Your Occasion is located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but we're willing to travel. For inquiries or to book an occasion, go to wisewordsforyouroccasion.wordpress.com or see us on Facebook or check out our YouTube channel. You'll find links to all three in this post.